There was a moment, years ago now, when something inside you already knew the real answer. Before the pros and cons list. Before asking everyone else around you what they honestly thought. Something quiet and immediate simply knew, almost instantly. And then the other voice showed up right afterward, the reasonable one, the practical one. Don't be dramatic about this. Think it through logically instead. So you overrode that first quiet knowing completely, and went with the reasonable choice instead. Looking back now, honestly, you already know exactly which one was actually right. This happens constantly, in nearly every important decision most people ever make throughout their entire life. Something immediate and quiet arrives first, almost instantly, before any real thinking even happens consciously. A flinch. A pull. A quiet, unmistakable no rising up from somewhere underneath the surface. And then, almost automatically, a second voice steps in right afterward to override it completely. Be reasonable. Don't overreact to this. Think about it properly first before deciding anything at all. That first voice gets quietly buried, again, exactly like it always has before. Most people were actually trained to do this from a genuinely young age, without ever realizing it was even happening to them at all. Don't be so sensitive about it. You're overreacting again, like you always do. Just be reasonable and think it through properly instead. Every single time that specific message got repeated, a small lesson quietly landed underneath it. Your first instinct can't actually be trusted on its own. Something else, something more logical and acceptable, has to override it instead, every single time it shows up. Here's what almost nobody actually tells you about that first, quiet voice you keep overriding constantly. It isn't irrational at all, despite what you've probably been taught to believe about it your entire life. It's actually pattern recognition, built from every single experience you've ever genuinely lived through up to this exact point. Your body and mind notice things consciously long before your rational thinking can actually catch up and explain them properly. That flinch, that pull, that quiet no, it's often more accurate than the careful logic that gets layered on top of it afterward. Think of someone who felt something quietly wrong about a specific relationship, right from the very beginning of it, honestly. A small, persistent unease that never actually fully went away, no matter how much time passed. But everyone around them said the person seemed genuinely great, on paper at least. So they overrode that quiet feeling completely, again and again, for genuinely years afterward. By the time they finally left, the damage had already accumulated significantly. That original quiet voice had actually been right about it, the entire time, from the very start. Now think of someone else entirely, facing a genuinely similar quiet unease about a completely different decision in their own life. This time, instead of immediately overriding it with logic and reasonable explanations, they actually paused for a moment first. What is this specific feeling actually trying to tell me right now, honestly? They listened directly to it, for what felt like the very first time in years. It led them somewhere completely different than everyone else around them had confidently expected or predicted for them. There's real, documented science behind exactly why that quiet first voice deserves genuinely more trust than most people ever actually give it. Researchers call it the somatic marker hypothesis, and it's genuinely fascinating once you actually understand it clearly. Your body registers the emotional outcome of past experiences directly, as real physical sensations, long before conscious reasoning can actually catch up and explain anything about it. A tight chest. A sinking stomach. A subtle pull toward or away from something specific. These aren't random noise happening for no reason at all. They're compressed data, drawn from your entire lived experience up to this point. This is exactly why people who've made a genuinely major, life-changing decision often say something remarkably similar afterward, almost word for word. I actually knew before I consciously knew, if that makes any real sense to you. The knowing arrived first, quietly, in the body itself. The explanation, the actual reasoning behind it, came later, sometimes considerably later, trailing well behind. Override that first signal enough times consistently, though, and something genuinely concerning starts to happen to it over time. It gets quieter, gradually, each and every single time it gets overridden without exception. Not because it was ever actually wrong to begin with, in most cases. Because it learned, slowly and painfully, that speaking up genuinely doesn't matter much anymore. Nobody's actually listening to it these days, including you yourself. Eventually, many people stop feeling that first signal clearly at all, in any real, distinguishable way. Not because it genuinely disappeared completely. Because it finally gave up trying to be heard by anyone, including its own owner. This is the actual, real cost of ignoring that quiet inner voice for years on end, one that almost nobody actually names correctly or clearly. It's not just one specific missed opportunity here and there throughout your life. It's a slow, gradual disconnection from your own genuine preferences, your own real values, your own honest reactions to things happening around you. You start living a life that technically looks completely reasonable from the outside looking in. But it quietly stops feeling like it's actually yours anymore, somewhere along the way. So how do you actually start listening to that ignored version of yourself again, starting today? You begin by simply noticing your very first reaction, before any rationalizing or explaining actually happens afterward. Someone offers you something specific. Notice the exact instant feeling that arrives first, immediately, before your mind starts building a reasonable case around it either way. Was it a genuine pull toward it, or a quiet flinch away from it instead? Just notice it clearly. Don't act on it immediately yet, necessarily. Just actually notice it happening, honestly, for the very first time in a while. Write these small, immediate reactions down somewhere, consistently, even when you ultimately choose to override them for genuinely good reasons in the end. This felt like a definite no, but I said yes anyway for practical reasons. This felt like a genuine pull, but I talked myself out of it eventually. You're not necessarily obligated to follow that first instinct every single time it shows up, to be clear about that. But writing it down keeps that specific channel open and functioning, instead of letting it quietly shut down completely from years of consistent neglect. Start actually testing that quiet voice on small, low-stakes decisions first, long before you ever trust it on genuinely major, life-changing ones. Which restaurant actually sounds right tonight, before checking every single review online first? Which specific task to tackle first today, before letting your calendar decide it for you automatically? Small reps like these rebuild real trust between you and that quiet internal signal, slowly and steadily. It's exactly like rebuilding trust with any person you've genuinely ignored for years. It takes small, consistent proof, repeated regularly, not one single dramatic gesture. Notice specifically when you're overriding that first signal simply to please someone else around you, rather than because you've actually found a genuinely better reason to do so instead. There's a real, meaningful difference between thoughtful reasoning and pure, automatic people-pleasing dressed up convincingly as logic. One genuinely considers the quiet signal and makes an informed, conscious choice from there. The other just silences it automatically, out of old, deeply ingrained habit, without ever really examining it honestly. Over time, something genuinely important shifts back inside you, quietly and steadily, the more you actually practice this specific approach. That first signal starts coming through more clearly again, gradually, the way it probably once did years earlier. Decisions start feeling less like confusing puzzles to be solved and more like something you can actually feel your way through instead, with real confidence. You haven't actually gained some brand new, mystical ability out of nowhere. You've simply started listening again to a voice that was honestly there the entire time, quietly waiting. So the next time something quiet and immediate rises up inside you, before all the careful reasoning even begins to form, pause for just one honest moment. Notice it clearly, without immediately explaining it away or dismissing it outright. That's the actual version of you that you've been quietly ignoring for genuinely years now, patiently waiting to be heard again. It was never actually gone completely, no matter how quiet it eventually became over time. It was simply waiting for you to finally start listening again, one honest moment at a time, starting today.